And on the line with us is Dr. Christian Parenti, PhD, professor of Global Liberal Studies Program at New York University, author of several books, including Tropic of Chaos, Climate Change, and the New Geography of Violence. The website, ChristianParenti, Parenti.com. Christian, welcome to the program.
Thank you. One correction, though, I'm not at NYU anymore. I'm at John Jay in the economics program. Got to give credit where credit is due.
All right, there you go. So the effects of climate change, to what extent is, in your opinion, is what we're looking at right now down in the Gulf, with Harvey, and now we've got Irma, and then behind Irma is Jose, and behind Jose is now Kaia or something like that. How much of this is the new normal?
Well, scientists are increasingly confident in saying that the intensity of these hurricanes, not their occurrence, because hurricanes have always occurred, but their intensity is to some extent attributed to climate change. So, yeah, I mean, the question is what's going to be the new normal? The thing is, there isn't going to be a new normal. The problem with climate change is that it is a process that is going to accelerate and, in nonlinear fashion. That's what all of the science has been saying for really like 40 years now. And we also have observations now, a good 30 plus years of observations to match against the computer model projections from the early 80s. And these models have been pretty correct, and they suggest that a rate of change that is going to be nonlinear, that's going to accelerate. Interestingly, one of the things that has happened in the last 10 years is we've had kind of a hurricane drought in the U.S., which has to do, in fact, with climate change and the warming of the land mass, and so a higher percentage of hurricanes than normal have actually been turning away from the mainland, but that may be changing, and these are very powerful hurricanes. And what my recent article in Jacobin was about was looking at how one of the earliest threats of climate change is probably going to be a new urban crisis on the coast, sort of the urban fringe of particularly the North Atlantic. And I wrote that before Harvey happened, and now we see one more incident of that on top of Katrina. But you can imagine, okay, what happens if these types of major inundations to major cities start happening every couple of years, with price tags of, the estimate now is maybe up to $180 billion in Houston. These kinds of price tags for rebuilding. What could happen is there'll be finally a realization that sea level rises and the increase of intense storms threatens the coastal urban infrastructure, and there will be a crisis of confidence and a collapse in property values, which then makes it that much harder for municipalities to try and defend themselves, because to build bioshields and seawalls,
they lose their tax base.
Yeah, they need money for that. And so there's this really weird kind of rational in the short term, irrational in the long term, hostage to property values and collective denial. I mean, who wants to be the first one to say, hey, I'm selling my house because I know it's going to be flooded in 20 years? No one's going to buy your house.
Right. So nonlinear is the magic word here that many of our listeners may not have picked up on or understood. Linear change is where, year one, the temperature goes up 1 degree, year two, it goes up, another one, just a straight line, basically. Nonlinear, whether it's a log function or something else, is where, it's not going in a straight line. It's starting to shoot up. This was Michael Mann's hockey stick, basically. And, that Al Gore popularized. How rapid do you expect change to be happening? I mean, here we are, it's 2017, 2020 is, 2.5 years away. 2030 is only 22.5 years away. Or, 12.5 years, excuse me. How is the world going to be different?
Well, I'm not in the prediction business. I mean, the scientists have models that project stuff, and, it's hard to say. But the best science is that by the end of the century, we'll probably have a minimum 3-foot sea level rise, maybe up to over 6 feet. And the problem with sea level rises is not just the slow sea level rise, but then what it does to moments of crisis, these major storms. And the thing that concerns me is, what is society going to do about this? So we could say, well, the models predict that there will be this many more droughts, this many more storms, but that doesn't actually answer your question necessarily. What will the world be like is actually answered by understanding what will society do. So let's say we have 20 or 30 or 40 years to deal with 5 or 6 Harveys simultaneously. Let's project that's coming. Well, what do we have to do to make sure that's not a catastrophe that turns into massive collapse in property values, triggers financial panics, and a general depression? What kind of policies have to be in place for us to deal with this properly? We'd have to have a kind of major rethink and redevelopment of our civil defense infrastructure. There's all sorts of details and specific technologies, building, alternate artificial reefs, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the core fundamental issues in it are there's going to have to be redistribution. We cannot continue on with this tremendously lopsided version of American capitalism where the rich just get richer and richer and we have more and more people in a stagnant economic condition. There's got to be redistribution, and that comes in part in the support for people who are in these coastal regions, who are going to get hammered, who do need to be, pulling back from coastal regions. And the role of the state has to be rethought. We live under this mythology that the free market handles everything. That's not true. That's not actually how American capitalism works, right? We have a very large public sector. The state has a long history of innovating and investing and being in the lead of producing all sorts of things. The iPhone has 12 different originally government-produced technologies in it. But we're in denial of that. We think about Steve Jobs. We don't think about the government. So we have to get real about the role of planning and subsidy in a market economy. We have to realize that this is a mixed economy. We either plan blindly without admitting it, or we're going to have to plan consciously. And if we plan consciously, the future of extreme storms could be very different than if we carry on as we are now in denial.
There's one other possibility that occurs to me. I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I've worked in India and I've worked in South Sudan and Kenya, places, well, South Sudan and India anyway, that have rainy seasons that are pretty profound. And what happens during those rainy seasons is that people die and infrastructure gets wiped out, but people just kind of hunker down, and it arguably is perpetuating poverty in some ways. I mean, some of it they work with, but some of it absolutely works against them. Could it just be that as the middle class of America continues to sink into being, a Dickensian kind of, lower working class, poorer and poorer, and that climate starts pounding us, that we just basically, our standard of living collapses and we become like Bangladesh or Pakistan or parts of India?
Certainly. If the 100,000 or so homes in Houston, which seem to have been pretty badly damaged, right? If there's about that many, 85% of them don't have flood insurance. If there's no aid for them, a lot of these people are going to be wiped out. They'll be left living in the carcasses of their moldy homes, and in the very near short term, we're looking at a large number of Americans seeing their standard of living significantly decline. Throw into that the fact that there are 13 Superfund sites in Houston that have been inundated, so they'll be living not only amidst mold but amid toxicity, with no doubt rising incidents of disease, mosquitoes everywhere. So yeah. That is the major risk from climate change. It translates into a lowering of the standard of living for most people, not necessarily off in some distant future, but bit by bit, beginning, here and now with Harvey.
Yeah.
That could be avoided. We have the laws, we have the money, we have the technology. We just don't have the political will to take responsibility. But I am also hopeful because there's something interesting that happens during these moments in the storms. Everyday life in America, we're bombarded with arguments about how the market is omniscient and omnipotent and perfect. But then a storm comes, and the discussion isn't about how much money everybody has and what you can get with it. It's about human generosity and human solidarity. And also, without naming it, there's a lot of it is about redistribution. Those who have are expected to give to those in need. And this is actually a principle that society, whether we acknowledge it or not, is really dependent on and built around. And a better society could be built around that ethos that emerges from people in moments of storms. But we have to articulate it. We have to have political movements and politicians that are consciously trying to harness these moments of solidarity and turn them into policies.
Yeah, a little earlier I was talking about on this program about how the great crash of 1929 was one of those crises that caused people to come together, that we tend to come together around disasters, and that provides then the consensus for something that's a little more democratic socialist than, you know, pure libertarian, you know, tough luck Charlie economics. Anyhow, Dr. Christian Parenti, so great to have you with us. Christian Parenti, Parenti.com, the website, and you can, oh, no personal Twitter. Here, Dr. Parenti, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Great talking.